Every day I get an emailed poem of the day, Writer's Almanac. And a couple of days ago, this is the poem I received, titled The New Year by Barbara Crocker. When a door bangs shut, a window doesn't open. Sometimes it slams on your fingers. God often gives us more than we can handle. A sorrow shared is a sorrow multiplied. There's a bottle of champagne waiting to be uncorked, but it's not for you. Nobody wants another poem. The prize-winning envelope has someone else's name on it. This year, you already know you're not going to lose 10 pounds. How can you feel hope when the weight of last year's rejections is enough to bury you? Still, the empty page craves the pen, wants to feel the black ink unscrolling on its skin. In spite of everything, you sit at your desk and begin. I am fortunate to have a stand-up desk, and in spite of everything, we begin again. Come Sing a Song With Me is our first hymn, and it says for verse 3, we will sing Come Walk in Snow With Me, oh great. Number 346.
Sing a song with me.
join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So be it.
Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to First Parish on this 11th day of Christmas. We are keeping the holiday going here for just a few days longer. How's that, Jerry? Is that better? Okay, great. I'm Deb Weiner. I'm Interim Director of Religious Education here at First Parish, and we're very glad that you're here. We hope that you will not only enjoy your time with us today, but in the days to come as well. And whether you are differently abled, politically radical or conservative, older or younger, or in whatever ways you are you, we say welcome. Now, following the service, we hope that you will join us in the common room for our community hour. You can stop by the welcome table on your way out of these doors if you would like to find out more about us and tell us more about you. And you should find a little blue card in the pew in front of you if you are a newcomer, and if you fill that out, that will help us to connect with you. We want to remind you that following this service, you can stop by the table in the common room to purchase a copy of John Buehrens' hot off the press, and I'm not kidding, book called Conflagration: How the Transcendentalists Sparked the American Struggle for Racial, Gender, and Social Justice. You can get it for the discounted price of $30, and John will sign it for you. Make sure that you come to the Lyceum presentation at 12 o'clock noon, where John will discuss the book. That's in room 202, and there is a light lunch provided. Yes?
Speaking of conflagration.
Oh, do we have fire? Lordy. Okie dokie then. Well, there's more. I love watching people play with fire as long as it's not me. Please join Annie Gonzalez-Milliken and me on Wednesday night for a, well, not quite 12th night, more like 14th night service as we honor Epiphany and burn away the remainder of the old year, embracing the new. That's going to be at 7:30, and we hope that you will join us for that. Now, there are many more announcements as well in the order of service, and oh yes, as you saw, John Gibbons is back, and he will be in the pulpit next Sunday, so make sure you're here then as well, so that you can find out what he learned and saw in his time away. Once more, we say welcome to you all. And before I move forward, I do want to introduce our preacher for this morning. I want to say what an honor it is for us to welcome the Reverend John Buehrens here to First Parish in Bedford. This really is his very first stop on his promotional tour for his book, and we're glad that he decided to start that tour here. John has served congregations in Tennessee, Texas, New York, Massachusetts, and California before retiring, sort of, in 2017. He served the UUA as president of the association from 1993 to 2001. He is a prolific author. He has sort of failed retirement. He is the co-author with Forest Church of A Chosen Faith, An Introduction to Unitarian-Universalism, which is the book that I always say to people, if you are thinking about Unitarian Universalism and you want to know more, you need to read this book. His other books include Understanding the Bible, An Introduction for Skeptics, Seekers, and Religious Liberals, A House for Hope, The Promise of Progressive Religion for the 21st Century, which was written with Rebecca Ann Parker, former president of Starr King School for the Ministry, Universalists and Unitarians in America, A People's History, and this new book, Conflagration. I want to say also that John is married to the Reverend Gwen Buehrens, who is an Episcopal priest, and he is the parent of two lovely daughters, Erica and Mary, and the grandfather of 4. He's also someone that I've been honored to work with and to have both as a friend and a mentor for, holy smokes, over 25 years. He actually dedicated our younger daughter, Abigail. And of course, there is his long connection to our own Reverend John Gibbons, which is a deep friendship that is at the heart of some of what he'll be talking about today, which extends now into a 4th decade. John, we are so glad that you are here with us, and thank you. So after that extended time of welcoming you and introducing John, I do want to move into a time for all ages, and I do want to talk a little bit about Epiphany. How many of you out there, kids, are you listening? How many of you think that Christmas is all over? Yeah, I see some hands. Christmas is over. I know. How many of you have taken down your Christmas tree and done all of that? Yeah, right, I understand. I haven't gotten there, and that's partly because I like to procrastinate and partly because Christmas isn't over yet. I don't mean to suggest that there will be more presents and more candy canes and stuff like that, although maybe. But have you heard that song about the 12 days of Christmas? Yes, right? Well, the first day of Christmas is said to be December 25th. We know that. We celebrate that as Christmas Day. And the days extend forward from there. And so today really is the 11th day of Christmas. And it is the eve of a time that is known in Western religions as Epiphany. It is said that tomorrow, the 12th day of Christmas, was the time when the wise men, the Magi, who were traveling, guided by the star, you know the story, right? Were guided to the baby Jesus, and they arrived at his bed and met him. And then, for those who believe that Jesus was the Son of God, he was revealed to the wise men as being holy. That was a remarkable occurrence. It is one of the reasons why we still have our nativity scene out here. You see those wise men at the bed of the baby Jesus right up here. Well, many cultures celebrate Epiphany. You probably know that Christmas carol about We Three Kings. We have sung that. We sang it here on Christmas Eve. And did you know that there is, in fact, a special cake made in France called Galette des Rois, which is the cake of the kings, and it has a bean in it, a fève, and if you find the bean, you are said to have good luck for the year. It is also the start of carnival and parade season in both Latin American countries like Brazil and in New Orleans, where, you guessed it, they celebrate the season by eating king cake. And there, if you get king cake, you will find a little baby baked into the cake. And it is good luck, and also you're supposed to host a party and give out another king cake. Now, back to the 3 kings who traveled a long way to visit the baby Jesus. These kings were often described as coming from different cultures and races. They were frequently thought to be African, Asian, and Arab. and they have most often been referred to as being named Casper, Melchior, and Balthazar, carrying gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Precious gifts. Now, what happens when people, even people who don't know each other very well, take a long trip together? You get to know each other, right? And you find out a lot about each other. And it is said that during their trip, the Magi, the wise men, became lifelong spiritual friends, even though they came from different places and different cultures. That's also something for us to celebrate right now in this time when we desperately need friendship and ways to come together. So, Merry Christmas to you all still. It's a time to remember the true meaning and value of the Christmas season that lives on. And now, the children and youth will leave for their religious education programs, and we're going to sing. If you want to sing out, sing out.
For All That Is Our Life is our next hymn. It's number 128.
First of all, let me say what a privilege it is to be here, particularly on the Sunday when you welcome back my friend Cardinal Gibbons. Now, he thinks he got that title by buying a t-shirt from a Catholic high school, or a sweatshirt, rather. I know that he got it by helping me get elected Unitarian-Universalist Pope. He ran my campaign for the presidency for this district back in the early 90s. But just to give you a sense of the quality of relationship between the two of us, our friendship, I've chosen as the reading for this morning some of his own words, which he delivered at the discharge to the minister when I retired from the service of the First Parish in Needham in 2012. And John began in his inimitable, slightly wacky and tangential way by saying, "All right, John, I'm here to give advice to the minister. I'm reminded, therefore, of a letter that once went to an advice columnist that said, 'Dear John, I hope you can help me. The other day I set off for work, leaving my husband in the house watching TV, and I hadn't driven more than a mile down the road when the engine conked out and the car shuddered to a halt. I walked back home to seek my husband's help, and I couldn't believe my eyes. He was in our bedroom with our neighbor's daughter. I'm 41, my husband is 44, the neighbor's daughter 22. We've been married for over 10 years, and when I confronted him, he broke down and admitted that they'd been having an affair for the last 6 months.' Well, the letter went on with a variety of salacious details and then concluded, 'My husband won't go to counseling, and I'm afraid I can't get through to him anymore. Can you please help? Sincerely, Sheila.' 'Dear Sheila,' responds the columnist, 'a car stalling out after being driven a short distance can be caused by a variety of faults within the engine. Start by checking that there's no debris in the fuel line. And if it's clear, check the vacuum pipes and hoses on the intake manifold, and also check the grounding wires. Or it could be that the fuel pump is faulty, causing low delivery pressure to the injectors.' Again, there are more details, but it is signed, 'I hope this helps. John.' Gibbons then assured the congregation that I probably didn't need marital help after all these years with Gwen, but that giving any sort of advice to me was rather unlikely to make any difference. So he wanted to be as simple and direct as possible, and his charge to me had only 2 words. He then reached down and presented me with his retirement gift that he had purchased for me, a doormat imprinted with the words, 'Go away.' This is good advice when one retires from parish ministry, and I'm glad you gave John the opportunity to rehearse for it. I took it, moved to the left coast, and so in coming back here, I now consider these words returned to the original sender. Welcome back, Your Eminence, and I hope this helps John.
On the first Sunday of each month, we dedicate our offering to a worthy cause. And this month, we are dedicating it to strengthen how we care for one another. So Liz Hannigan, who does so much to help us care for one another, is going to tell us a little bit more about the Benevolence Fund.
Hi. Okay, I'm not good at public speaking, so be gentle. So, who here knows that we have a benevolence fund? Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about it. The fund was started several years ago after a family in this congregation suffered a major medical issue. This community came together and provided meals, groceries, Christmas gifts, because of course bad things happen at the holidays too, gas money and financial support to help this family out. Now, some people wanted to help out anonymously, so they donated money to the church in the family's name. This experience showed us that there was a real need for a fund that could be tapped quickly. John and the Social Responsibility Committee got together and the Benevolence Fund was born. So what is it for and who can use it? Currently, the ministers are the ones who approve this fund being used, but anybody can make an appeal. Everything is confidential and done in conjunction with other supports like fundraising efforts, lay pastoral care, Stop and Shop gift cards, caring crew help, etc. This is a Band-Aid. It's not a long-term fix. Okay. How can you help? In a few minutes, the collection basket will come around. If you are able, put some extra money in it. Half of what's collected goes to the Benevolence Fund. You can also make a donation to the Benevolence Fund at any time in somebody's name, whether it's in memory or just because you think that person is amazing. If you're selling something on the anno list, as most of us do frequently, and request a donation to the church, put a caveat in that the donation go to the Benevolence Fund. Every little bit helps. If you aren't in a position to help out financially, that's okay too. Maybe you can help out with caring crew as a coordinator, or making meals or driving. Maybe you can refer somebody to the Benevolence Fund who is struggling, but maybe who isn't very public about it, which in this community, I think a lot of us are struggling, but don't necessarily want to come out and admit that we are. The bottom line is that we're all vulnerable to illnesses, accidents, or crises, and we don't always have an adequate support net due to circumstances we can't control. If you look around this room, this fund will help somebody in need that may or may not even know it yet. And hopefully it's not you. But if it is, the fund is there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you all for all you do to take care of one another when hard times hit. It's a beautiful thing about spiritual community. The morning offering will now be gratefully received.
One of the things I've always loved about His Eminence is that he takes himself rather lightly. A great Roman Catholic wit, G.K. Chesterton, once said, "Angels can fly because they take themselves lightly," whereas the devil fell because of his gravity. So this morning, as he returns from his sabbatical, I can't help but recall or be grateful that he's coming back at the end of his sabbatical, unlike a story that he tells about himself about an unexpectedly premature return from a sabbatical back in the 90s. Some of you were probably here then, some 20 years ago, John. He was supposed to go to the Khasi Hills of India, in part on my behalf, with my special assistant for international relations, Ken McLean, to visit the Unitarian partners there. Ken had made all the arrangements, but neglected to tell Gibbons that he had to get a visa to go to India. And when that lapse surfaced, McLean simply responded, "Oh, well, we're both ministers, we'll talk our way in." That actually worked with the airline, but the immigration authorities in Calcutta were not amused or persuadable. And they kept John in the Calcutta airport version of the black hole for about 24 hours, I believe, until they shipped him back to Logan COD. And the following Sunday, he showed up at church here, sat in the back, and then at the Joys and Concerns quietly came forward and, to everyone's surprise, lit a candle, turned to the congregation and said simply, 1 billion people in India, and they drew the line at me. During my years serving the Needham congregation, John and I were both in a small group of colleagues that met monthly for mutual support. One reason that I had taken that parish after serving as UUA president was that it was close to where my parents settled in their retirement in later years. I knew they needed some spiritual support, and eventually I did as well. My mother was wheelchair-bound with multiple sclerosis, and when my dad learned that he had terminal cancer, I knew that as their son, I was not the right person to do my own father's memorial service. So I asked John if he would meet with my parents, get acquainted with my brothers and their families as well. And he did. He knew that my dad was no churchgoer, that his chapel was his woodworking shop. And so for the service, he creatively and wisely found a poem, kind of like the poem he found to open things this morning. A poem called "The Contents of a Hardware Store as Proof of the Existence of God." And he then let each of my dad's 3 sons say just a few words about our differing experiences of him. Because, you know, one of the real truths when you lose a parent is that your siblings did not quite have the same parent you did. You came into their life at a different moment. Our older daughter, Erica, so loved John's ministry on that occasion that when she married her husband, Andy, a bar mitzvah boy, whose mom was then the president of her synagogue, it took place in a downtown Boston Unitarian church, but under a chuppah, with a rabbi as the principal officiant, but with Gibbons as the co-officiant. And then when our younger daughter, Mary, chose to celebrate her marriage to her wife, Anna, who comes from a Filipino Catholic family, in the Episcopal church where my wife was then a priest associate, the rector presided, but Gibbons assisted, even in an inclusive communion service in which everybody participated. Catholics, UUs, Episcopalians, non-believers, and when my mom died. Who conducted her memorial? Not I. Although it was held in the Needham Church, the Cardinal came with a choir of women from Uganda, some of whom had been her caregivers for years. Oh, wow. Our family chaplain, my spiritual friend. This, in no small part, is testimony to how privileged I think you should feel to have him as your pastor, and how much I feel toward this man who has ministered to me through the years, nearly 30 now. John knows that if, God forbid, something happens to me on the road, or a bus hits me in San Francisco, where I now live, Gwen or our daughters will summon him to come out there to help organize my memorial, just as I would surely want to be present for his. Spiritual friendship is a phrase that was used by our forebears in this faith back in the 19th century, and that I believe desperately needs revival among us, deeper understanding. Too many of us have, well, I do, 2,379 friends on Facebook, about half of whom I've actually met. Ministers like Theodore Parker formed a bond with people like Frederick Douglass, crossing race lines. Emerson helped out the Alcott family with a kind of benevolence fund when Bronson, as usual, proved incapable of earning a living and lost his school in downtown Boston for actually alluding to sexuality. The only criteria for admission to Harvard and preparation for the ministry in those days, was knowing Latin and Greek. Although, as Ben Jonson quipped of Shakespeare, I now retain but small Latin and less Greek. I know that every one of them had read Cicero's great essay, De Amicitia, on friendship. Friendship can only exist between the good, Cicero affirms. And when we mean the good, we mean those whose actions and lives attempt to display honor, honesty, equity, liberality, and who are freed from self-interest, greed, and vengefulness, who have the courage of their convictions. That is the standard I think true friends, spiritual friends, really try to hold one another to, even though there is none among us who doesn't lapse from one of those qualities at one time or another. In the Christian tradition that those same early ministers of our faith inherited and helped to reinterpret, the traditional theme for this week was how Jesus himself had come to his mentor, John, and humbled himself to receive baptism. Although it proved a theological conundrum for subsequent Christians to explain what sin did he need to be purged of? He then joined his mentor in proclaiming the coming reign or commonwealth of God right here on earth. But not as a warning, the way the Baptist had done, more as a promise and a reality already fulfilled, saying that wherever it shows up, say in a beloved community like this, wherever you and I treat one another as truly sisters and brothers, children together of one great mystery, committed to one another's spiritual and moral flourishing, then the kingdom, the commonwealth, everything we've dreamed of is already here, right now. I know you sometimes feel its absence. We all do. I hope when you come here, you feel its presence, its love, its challenge. Some of you may have seen an essay that was published in our denominational magazine, the UU World, that I entitled Spiritual Friendship and Social Justice, Lessons from the Transcendentalists, because in it I gave more illustrations of how that transformative group of a small group of Boston area Unitarian ministers and their friends, which met only from 1836 to 1840, really did help spark or revive and rekindle the sputtering commitment to what the founders of our American democracy called the self-evident truths that all of us are created equal, and that we have been endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as it says in the Declaration. I led with one of the few but remarkable original discoveries I made, which was that when Transcendentalist minister Theodore Parker died in Florence, Italy, in 1860, vainly trying to recover from tuberculosis, which nearly everybody had back then, you know. It was Parker, you may recall, who was the eloquent source behind two phrases that were later made famous by others. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. Lincoln stole that and used it in his Gettysburg Address. And the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends. It bends toward justice, later often used by Dr. King. Now, partly because I was an exchange student in Italy at the age of 16 and can still speak some Italian, last year my wife and I went to Florence, where I visited Parker's grave and discovered that one of my predecessors in that pilgrimage was none other than Frederick Douglass, whom the two of them had worked together through the 1850s in protecting fugitive slaves, rather like Sanctuary for Maria. Douglass showed up, having arranged to arrive on the precise anniversary of Parker's death, and that evening wrote to a friend, right after taking coffee, we went to Parker's grave. And you are right, its humbleness is not worthy of him. A man like that should have a monument that is a sermon in itself. He then went back to Rome, where he'd been, and commissioned the greatest sculptor he could find to put up the monument that is still there, the inscription of which ends, "His name is here inscribed in marble. His memory on the hearts of those whom he saved from slavery and superstition. A spiritual friendship that transcended death, for this was 27 years after Parker had died." You see, the Transcendentalists pushed themselves and one another to extend the idea of friendship beyond the commonplace into a deep devotion to the idea that my full flourishing as a human being, spiritually and morally, depends on me being concerned about yours, and even about the people that I have not met. They went far beyond being sort of a white boys club of like-minded ministers, although that's how they started, into encouraging others to practice spiritual friendship in the service of a common quest for that kingdom of justice that we all yearn for. Here's my point this morning. Most of us really don't do enough to push ourselves out of our comfort zones, to deepen our relationships with people who are different from ourselves. I've always loved John's assertion that this parish has an affirmative action program for Republicans. But I think that the New Year's resolution that is most needed among us is to revive the practice of spiritual friendship in the service of a greater justice. Not just on Facebook or in tweets. Those folks, you know, didn't go through a day without entering some self-critical observation in a journal. They admitted despair and doubt and discoveries of new truth and awe at the natural world that's been given us, the life that's been given us to use for the common good. And they even, and this astonishes me, often shared their journals with one another. "Send me your journal," wrote James Freeman Clark, who was the youngest member of the group, to his spiritual friend Margaret Fuller, "and I will send you mine." Clark, although now almost forgotten, is the thread figure through my narrative about them as activists because, well, he was friends with everybody. It was he who first encouraged Margaret that she could be a writer. I kept his portrait in my office when I was UUA president, partly because it was the best work of art the UUA owned, but because I so admired him. He took the gospel of liberal religion west of the Appalachians with The Frontier, Louisville, Kentucky, in 1833. He wrote 22 books. He transcended differences in social location, gender, ideas, and yes, race. He became the first professor of comparative religion in the United States when his book, 10 Great Religions, which went through 22 editions and stayed in print for 50 years, led him to teach at Harvard in that field. He corresponded with liberals in India and Japan and China and all across Europe. I was once given an honorary degree that called me the evangelical rabbi of liberal religion, a phrase that led my daughter to send a card that she'd found at college that showed a guy with a beard, a rather well-patched and well-traveled robe, and a prayer shawl, of course. And under his little yarmulke, where the hair had somehow been all loved off on top, the label, "The Velveteen Rabbi," with the question, "When do I get to run and play with the real rabbis?" Well, I have treasured, like nothing else in ministry, my opportunities to be with people who are real teachers, real models, real pastors, real friends. So did Clark. When he first failed as an extemporary preacher, which I understand you attempt to do, Annie, no notes. He thought he was no good at it. He wrote to Margaret, "The courage ran out the ends of my fingers." And he watched people in the back of the church get up and leave. And she wrote him and sent a few sermon ideas and encouraged him. When they were both just 20 years old, they had studied the German idealists together. That was central to the Transcendentalists. Quite an intimate thing to do, crossing gender lines. But I think they'd realized early on they weren't meant to marry. Margaret would have made a lousy minister's spouse in the 19th century. Instead, she hung in with Clark, who, when she tragically died on her way back from revolutionary Europe in 1850 with her baby and the baby's father, helped to rescue Margaret's reputation and answer the question, was she ever married to the man? By publishing the memoir of Margaret Fuller Ouseley. Encouraged her in so many ways to become one of the fountains of American feminism. It's rarely pointed out, but nearly all of the transcendentalists were from right around here and grandchildren of members of the Revolutionary War set. Emerson's grandfather was minister in Concord, watching the revolution break out at the North Bridge. Parker's grandfather was Captain John Parker, who led the Minutemen on the Lexington Common that same Sunday. Like Frederick Douglass, Parker realized early on that to end slavery in America would likely require something like a second American Revolution. Or as Douglass put it in a poem he wrote when the Supreme Court outrageously said that in the Dred Scott case, people of color could never be full citizens. The fire thus kindled, meaning the revolution, may be revived again. The flames are extinguished, but the embers remain. One terrible blast may produce an ignition which shall wrap the whole South in wild conflagration. Thus the title of my book, How the Transcendentalists Sparked the American Struggle for Racial, Gender, and Social Justice, in which the first scene is another conflagration in which the abolitionist minister Charles Follen died at sea on Long Island Sound amid burning bales of cotton in the conflagration of the steamer Lexington on a January night in 1840. Now, friends, in this new year that lies ahead of us, we face spiritual and moral perils that are as great as any faced in the run-up to the Civil War. The question is simply this: how are we to use our capacity for friendship and hope to preserve the ideals on which our democracy was founded? Will a third American Revolution be necessary? We must hope not. But if it comes to that, let's pray that it be largely nonviolent. Going down one of the nearby roads just yesterday, I came across a sign reading, "Any functioning adult, 2020. But should the tantrum addicted child now occupying the highest office in this land not be removed by trial in the Senate, and God forbid be reelected in the fall through voter suppression and foreign interference and the corruption that persists in an electoral college that is undemocratic at its core, then I, for one, will be turning to my friends for ways in which to have a third American Revolution. Perhaps in the form of something like a general strike, a refusal to work, to buy anything but basic food, to do anything but sit down and protest in the streets until the self-transcending purposes for which our founders and our forebears in faith pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor can be restored in this land that Lincoln proclaimed the last best hope of humankind. My friends, we owe this solidarity not only to one another, but to the friends who go well beyond Maria, who are simply symbolized by her presence and hospitality in your midst. And we owe it to those who came before us to show us the way, and to those who, in our lifetimes, minister to us by helping us to sustain our hope and our principles and our vision. We owe it to one another, my friends. Maybe we be so resolved. Amen.
We will close with a simple song, wishing each other peace as we leave this gathering, and the rough translation being, "Go now in peace and see you again soon." And I hope that we all will, especially after that rousing encouragement towards deepening our friendships. So we'll be singing Shalom Havarim twice through, all together, and then we'll split into a round, doing one side and the other side coming in after. And it goes, yeah? And it's number 400. Thanks, Steve. Shalom Havarim, Shalom Havarim, Shalom, Shalom. Shalom Havarim, Shalom Havarim, Shalom, Shalom. Lahiraot, Lahiraot, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Havarim, Shalom.
In the words of our forebearer, the courageous Theodore Parker, let ours be a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living. Go in peace, my friends.